I mean, Bitcoin has had a massive impact on my life. There's very few things that have had a bigger impact on my life than Bitcoin. I'd say probably my marriage, my kids, more than anything else, my journey and recovery, which has basically taught me everything that I know about myself and about why I'm here. What's the purpose of life? And maybe perhaps the ocean, because I grew up in the ocean, so that had a huge impact. But other than that, Bitcoin has had a bigger impact than anything else.
Today, I'm excited to welcome Hermann to the podcast. Hermann is the chairman of the Surfer Kids and Bitcoin Ekasi. Welcome to the Bitcoin Edge, Hermann.
How's it? Jeff, thanks for having me.
It's great to see you today, all the way from South Africa. Before you tell us about your projects, tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's great to meet you. Glad we could do this. I mean, yeah, look, I grew up in South Africa. My family has been here for many generations. I traveled a lot as a youngster. I spent a lot of time in Europe, but I came back to South Africa. I am married with 2 kids. I met my wife in Amsterdam in 2008, same year as the big global financial crisis, and that's kind of what woke me up to the reality of the financial fuckery that's going on around the world, and how people are just, sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on the podcast, but it was quite a mind bending experience because I was at university at the time and I was studying, and I was curious about these things. And I mean, I didn't come across Bitcoin that year. It was another 4 years before I stumbled across Bitcoin. A friend of mine gave me a copy of Bitcoin magazine in 2013. I was very interested, very curious. I obviously didn't know what the hell I was looking at, but it seemed significant. I immediately thought that this is a significant thing. Somehow it just that I think it was the fact that I read Mandela's biography at an early age, and it made a big impact on me. A particular sentence that he mentions, where he describes how he was at boarding school and he watched the prefects of the school break the rules. And it dawned on him that they were the ones that were supposed to enforce the rules. And so he asked himself this question, which was, well, if the people that are supposed to enforce the rules are breaking them, then who's watching them? And he had no answer to that question. And he's not the first person to ask that question. I've read it many other places since. But so when I read about Bitcoin, and it instantly became clear that this was a system where there was nobody needed to enforce the rules, because the rules were sort of enforced by the network itself. And so I was instantly curious, but it took many years before I really understood the significance. Yeah, it didn't happen straight away, obviously.
Yeah, our journey is big rabbit hole. I also read Nelson Mandela's book, Long Walk to Freedom, right? And he had some amazing insights. It's funny how you tie that back to Bitcoin, rules without rulers.
Yeah.
Do you see that as part of the big problem, that the people at the top are doing whatever they want while most of the rest of society are suffering due to those printing of money and many things they do at the top?
I mean, yeah, that's definitely a huge part of the problem. I mean, Bitcoin doesn't solve all of it, but it solves it in one particular area, which is the issuance of money. You know, I also fell for the idea that you could put everything on a blockchain, and I had my shitcoin phase like everybody else. I abandoned all of that in, I think that was 2018. The whole ICO boom really disillusioned me. But yeah, I mean that sort of speaks to that point, which is that even with something like Bitcoin, and you can see it with all the drama playing out in the Bitcoin community itself, where human beings are so sort of entitled to attention. I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but it's almost like inevitable that, it's a part of human nature that if you end up in a position of power, inevitably that's what's going to happen. So Yeah, it's just fascinating that we have this decentralized network that sort of bypasses that problem of human nature. It's fascinating. I'm still fascinated about that to this day. I've only come across that in one other area of life. So it's very rare to have this type of this decentralized system. So yeah, it definitely addresses that problem of human nature, which I think goes back as old as time itself, I guess.
Mhm. That's very interesting about human nature, how that when most of us get into positions of power, it's very enticing to look the other way or justify. I even look at myself if I was in government, I think, would I look the other way because I think I'm doing a lot of good for the country or for whatever? And yes, I'm sure it's very easy to look the other way. So that's why Bitcoin is so significant because no one's in charge. We get to just go with the math, with the blockchain, and the truth is in the Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean the rules define the network, and the network enforces the rules, and there's not much that any one of us can do about that, and that's great. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how deep one should go, but I mean, like we adopted Bitcoin in 2015, and as soon as I started using it, I mean, it appealed to me. The idea appealed to me, but it's only really once I started using it that it became that it became really apparent how significant it is. But the idea still fascinates me to this day. And yes, I mean, that problem of human nature is within all of us. Like I recognize that within myself. You can very clearly see that when you look at social media, how people fall into the trap of sort of, playing for the audience, which is basically the same thing. It's this alluring pool of popularity and power, and the ego inflating experience that comes with that. And I don't think anybody is exempt from that, which is what makes Bitcoin so interesting.
So, would you say that Bitcoin has made you become more of yourself?
Um, I mean, I don't attribute too much significance to. I mean, there's interesting ideas that come into your life once you adopt Bitcoin. You look at things a little differently, but I mean, I don't think I don't want to read too much into it. I think people see a lot in Bitcoin, and more often than not, it's more a reflection of themselves than anything about the network itself. So I don't want to read too much into it. I like to keep it simple. Bitcoin is just a tool. I have my foundation in other things that have very interesting parallels to Bitcoin. I'm a recovering addict, and I see interesting parallels between the recovery process, which is a lifelong journey. There's fascinating parallels between that and Bitcoin, but my understanding of myself is rooted in the spiritual principles that underlie that program of recovery. Bitcoin is that's just a tool. It's a bunch of computers that connect over the internet, and it's not like I don't want to make the mistake of looking at this thing as if it's some sort of a spiritual experience to be into Bitcoin. I think a lot of people perhaps make that mistake too, and I think that's maybe what also where a lot of conversations about what Bitcoin is and what it isn't, what it should be, where this is where it goes wrong, where people have this idea of what Bitcoin should be, and it's more a reflection of what they are and what the network is. And so what they're doing is they're projecting their own identity onto this object rather than to see the object or try to see the object for what it actually is. I don't identify with Bitcoin. I mean, I call myself a Bitcoiner, but there are other things that root my existence far deeper than that. I would say, and I think that's a healthy way to look at it. Yeah, that's just my personal take.
Yeah. Well, I didn't think we'd go down this rabbit hole so quickly, but I do like the Bitcoin spiritual discussion, and I'll just tell you why it's been a little bit spiritual for me. I don't believe it fixes everything, but I was beginning to lose hope in the world. I was beginning to lose hope. I did have a connection with, something greater than myself. I have that. But I also was losing hope because when our money is broken, the world becomes very broken. So I do ascribe a little bit to fix the money, fix the world. I agree it doesn't fix everything. But once I started learning about Bitcoin and realizing, wow, there are people now in Africa who can also adopt this new protocol system and get away from this other fiat system that seems to be stealing from us. So it gave me hope. And hope to me is a little bit spiritual because I saw hope for the whole world. So only in that way is how I feel it's spiritual. Hey there. Don't forget to like and subscribe to help me grow the channel. Want to sleep easy? MICROSEED lets you stamp your seed phrase onto a small steel washer. Buy the device once and use it forever. I love it. It's discreet, precise, and easy to transport. Get yours below. For peace of mind with collaborative custody, the Bitcoin Advisor is a trusted team who can also help with inheritance planning. Just scan the QR code or use the link below. And check out these super cool SATOSHOEs with over 40 styles to choose from. Plus 10% off with my link below. Now back to the show.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't want to underplay the effect that it's had on my life. Bitcoin has had a massive impact on my life. There's very few things that have had a bigger impact on my life than Bitcoin. I'd say probably my marriage, my kids, more than anything else, my journey and recovery, which has basically taught me everything that I know about myself and about why I'm here. What's the purpose of life? But other than those things, the only other thing that has had, and maybe perhaps the ocean, because I grew up in the ocean, so that had a huge impact. But other than that, Bitcoin has had a bigger impact than anything else. So if you like, in terms of like education, if I had to ask myself, where did I learn the most about the world around me? From a more sort of like an academic theoretical perspective, so not spirituality or any of that stuff, just like pure sort of this is how the world works. But Bitcoin has had by far the biggest impact on my life. So it's made me see things in a very different way. It's made me look different at just about everything. So there is a spiritual component to that journey for sure, because it makes you question things. I mean, look, one of the things I always find very interesting is that I don't feel very comfortable around normal people. I'm very awkward around normal people. I'm very not awkward, but I just can't do small talk, for example. Like I can't talk about bullshit. And so the one place, there's two places where I feel super comfortable. The one is around fellow recovering addicts, because there's no like hiding the shit, like everybody knows what the problem is and everybody knows why they're here, and nobody's trying to pretend. Let's put it that way. And the other place I feel really comfortable is around Bitcoiners for the same reason. They're not trying to sugarcoat things. They're not trying to pretend. And more than anything else, they're prepared to look a problem straight in the face and not to shy away from the problem. And that is something that I don't find in many other places. And in fact, it's completely absent in most of sort of polite societies. So there is a spiritual component to it for sure. I just don't want to overplay that because my experience is rooted in more than that. But in terms of hope for the world, like there are very few things that give me hope. I mean, those things that do give me hope give me a lot of hope. I'm very optimistic about the future. But what I'm saying is that there's very few things that I think are hopeful, and there's many things that seem hopeless. And Bitcoin is one of those things that give me a lot of hope for the future. And I mean, I've seen that in real life. I've seen how it changes lives with the project that we run. But again, you don't want to overstate that impact, because it's going to take so much more than just Bitcoin to really change things on the ground. Like this is one of the tools in the toolbox, but again, I think it's not a silver bullet at all. I think because of our tendency towards hype, and everybody can sometimes fall. I think everybody's prone to that. I think it gets overstated a lot of times just how impactful it can be. It can be super impactful, but I think a lot of people make the mistake of overstating the impact and losing sight of reality. And I'm careful not to do that, because I think when you do that, you then risk becoming disillusioned. Like if you introduce Bitcoin into a community and you say to yourself, right, in 5 years from now, we're going to sort all this shit out because everybody's going to fix themselves by adopting Bitcoin. You're going to be disillusioned, and I'd rather save people that disillusionment and say, look, it's going to take a generation. But that being said, without Bitcoin, it would take way more than a generation. You might be stuck where you are now for another 2 or 3 generations, and in fact, it could deteriorate. Whereas with Bitcoin, you have that opportunity to fix the next generation, so to speak.
Yeah, that's some very interesting points. I love that you make the connection between, addicts being sober, living honest lives, and also in Bitcoin, we strive to know the truth about what's going on in the world. I just wanted to ask because I want to get into your project, but I often hear that one of the problems today is many people are off gambling, whether it's in the altcoins or some turn to drugs and alcohol as a way to escape. Do you find that's one of the challenges you face over there in South Africa? People are trying to find ways to escape?
Absolutely. I mean, look, to be honest with you, that's one of the most perplexing things to me, is that I don't understand why there aren't more people in Bitcoin talking about addiction and recovery. Because, well, first of all, addiction is a global pandemic. And most people don't realize that drug addiction is the tip of the iceberg. I mean, personally, my recovery journey is recovery from drugs and alcohol. But when you understand addiction, it's like, well, drug addiction is just that one little piece of the addiction puzzle, which is deemed unsavory by society. People look at drug addicts and they sort of, they're repulsed by it. But then there are other forms of addiction that's encouraged by society that you get rewarded for. I've seen families destroyed by people that are addicted to pursuing their careers just as much as a drug addiction can destroy that family. I've seen people's lives destroyed because of consumerism and debt, just as much as drug addiction can destroy lives. And that's really what addiction is at the end of the day. Addiction is basically just a behavior that is compulsive, that you don't control, that ends up destroying your life. It's as simple as that. So whether it's drug addiction, shopping, food, whatever the case may be, it's all addiction. And so I'm kind of surprised that the addiction recovery conversation isn't bigger in Bitcoin, because of all people, I would imagine Bitcoiners would be able to understand that much better than anyone else. Particularly because I see Bitcoin as a solution to a form of addiction, which is money printing. Governments are addicted to popularity, and the system encourages that. They're encouraged to buy votes by spending money, and in order to do so, they have to print money to pay for the things that they can't afford to. And that is classic addict behavior, kicking the can down the road, continuing with the behavior that is very obviously detrimental and very obviously going to have harmful effects in the long run, and yet unable to stop that behavior because the short-term benefit in their minds outweighs the long-term pain, which is not the case. The long-term pain that it's going to cause is going to be way worse. But addicts are unable to stop despite that. So I think it's all over the world. But yeah, we see that in South Africa as well. I think the more destructive types of addictions perhaps are more prevalent in poorer communities, things like drugs and alcohol, obviously, because it's a more instant form of escape. Whereas, it's more the types of addiction that you see in more developed parts of the world are perhaps a little bit more sophisticated. Where people would collect possessions and indebt themselves that way and live out their addiction. But as far as I'm concerned, addiction is at literally pandemic proportions. So that is definitely something that I'm well aware of. I've seen the detrimental effects firsthand. And I honestly, there's a huge number of parallels between the solution to addiction and Bitcoin, which is a solution to a particular type of addiction. The parallels are fascinating, and that's perhaps one of the reasons why I was attracted to Bitcoin early on, because I came into recovery, and at the same time that I stumbled across Bitcoin. That those two things happened at more or less the same time. I walked into my first recovery meeting in 2013 and started reading about Bitcoin at the same time. And so sort of coming at the same problem from two different angles, really. So yeah, it's just fascinating.
So, what are some more of the parallels that you see? I'm hearing that the money is broken, people have lost purpose. What else have you seen between the two?
Well, I think the most interesting parallel is that the solution itself is something that lies beyond human control. So you can't rely on something that is ultimately within the grasp of human control to solve the problem. Because the moment it's within the grasp of human control, whatever you think is the solution will be co opted. And so Bitcoin is this decentralized network that is comprised of people at the end of the day, because it's people that are running the miners, it's people that are making transactions, it's people that are running the nodes. But the network is so widely decentralized that it's not within the control of any single group or person. And the network of recovery meetings operate very similarly. There's a very basic program behind these network of meetings. It's called the 12-step program, but it's not within any single person's control. And it's been such a long time that the guidelines that guide these things don't really change. And if they do change, it'll take a very, very, very long time of deliberation to get certain things through to the point where it's actually adopted by the entire network. So it's this decentralized approach where no one person or no one group can either control or is elevated above another group or to have more influence. You'll find that Bitcoiners have an almost allergic reaction to the idea of elevating one group of people over another in terms of influence. The same is true in 12-step recovery programs, where there's an allergic reaction to that. It's like, no, nobody has more influence than anyone else. The other parallel is that the Bitcoin network is based on math at the end of the day. It's all math basically, and that's why you can trust it, because math doesn't change. And the 12-step recovery programs are based on spiritual principles that mankind has been aware of for millennia. It's a common thread that runs through all major religions. It's just crystallized within the 12-step recovery process in a way that gets rid of all the layers of dogma that has built up. But if you get rid of all the layers that have built up over the centuries, and you really look at what is this text actually saying, then a lot of the world's major religions sort of hone in on the spiritual principles that underlie this recovery program. It's not a religious thing; it goes beyond religion. That's the other interesting parallel between fiat addiction and Bitcoin and recovery from addiction in terms of drug addiction. The other fascinating parallel is that both are almost completely misunderstood by most people. So, I mean, the amount of FUD that Bitcoin has had to face over the years is astounding. And the misconceptions that have been spread about Bitcoin is just mind boggling. You get to a point where you don't even want to reply to some of the people on Twitter anymore, because you've said the same thing so many times over and over, and yet these ideas still persist. And recovery from drug addiction, 12-step recovery, is almost the same. Like every single person that I talk to that is not in recovery has this idea that the 12-step program is religious. It's not at all. I mean, in fact, in the very opening paragraphs of this program, it specifically states it's a not religious program. And the founder, Bill W., was a staunch atheist, and specifically came up with this 12-step program because he realized that there are too many people for whom religion won't work, because it's too dogmatic. And so you've got to find something that cuts through that and gets to the spiritual principles underneath that, to cause a life-changing experience in the mind of an addict who's obsessed with the self, And the solution to that is a wider awakening to the bigger reality. It's you've got to get rid of the self obsession and understand that there's something much, much, much bigger going on that you're just a small part of. So yeah, I mean, I just almost see parallels wherever I look between the two.
I love that you explained that. You explained it so well. I agree. I think the 12-step program are incredible. And that was such a great parallel. Kind of made me think of the nodes and decentralized and how Bitcoin is for everybody. It's for all different people. You can have your religion, but you can also be not religious, or you can just be spiritual. And that's more inclusive. I love that. Hi everyone, I'm excited to share that I'll be a speaker at BTC Prague 2026, the biggest and most influential Bitcoin-only event in Europe, from the 11th to the 13th of June. Come and join me to hear incredible speakers like Michael Saylor, Jack Mallers, Fred Fenixon, and many more, and connect with a community of true Bitcoiners. Get your tickets now before prices go up, and use my link below for a discount. See you there. I wanted to ask you about inflation in South Africa. I know in America, the US dollar's lost 99% of its value over the last 100 years. The South African rand has probably lost 99% of its value over the last 50, 60 years. So it's going down quicker. Are people very aware of inflation there?
I mean, the South African rand has gone from 3 rand to the dollar in my lifetime to where it's at now, which is 18 rand to the dollar. So my first memories of exchange rates are, where the South African rand was between 3 and 5 to the dollar. So it's lost from between 3 to 5 all the way down to 17 or 18. It's not huge. Well, I mean, it is big, but it's not as bad. It's not as bad as it has been in other parts of the world. There are many other currencies that have done a lot worse. So in a way, we're fortunate. We haven't had the massive instability that you often see in countries like South Africa. Where there's where there's huge political instability. It could have been way worse. So people are aware of inflation. Obviously, it's I think depending on what you look at, it's anything between 10 to 15%. If you look at real inflation, not the phony government numbers, which I don't even know what that is, but like in terms of real inflation, I would say, I mean, somebody shared a menu from a Spur menu with me the other day, and Spur's it's like McDonald's in the US. They're everywhere, and this is comparing prices over like I think it was like a 30-year period, and based on those prices, yeah, the inflation rate was annualized between 10 to 15%. So people are definitely aware of it. That's high enough to make you aware of it, for sure.
Yeah.
But we haven't had it as bad as it could have been. Like, I mean, I just have to reiterate, considering the political instability, it could have been way worse. And that's actually one of the reasons that makes me optimistic. Like if you look at South Africa, there's so many problems here, but if you look at the situation and you imagine what the problems that would be with a situation like that, it actually could have been way worse. I think we've had it pretty good. It's one of the reasons I'm still here. And obviously because I've got Bitcoin, I'm not too stressed about instability. But yeah, people are very much aware of it, and people in South Africa are struggling. I think the vast majority of people in this country have it very, very tough in a way that, people in the more developed part of the world often don't understand just how tough it really is. We just had a volunteer leave us. They're leaving tomorrow, and him and his family were here from Ohio in the US. They spent 3 months working with the project, and they made it very clear that it's way more difficult for people on the ground here than what they'd imagine. People really live in the mud, so to speak. It's not that people are just struggling. It's like they're literally living in the mud. it's very, very tough for many people.
Well, on that note, tell us about Bitcoin Ekasi and the Surfer Kids and what you're trying to do with the circular economy there.
We basically, I looked at Bitcoin Beach in El Salvador in 2019, and the director of that project, Mike Peterson, was on a podcast, and it was funny because the person interviewing him was very skeptical about this idea that you could use Bitcoin as everyday money. But as soon as I heard that, I was like, this is a fascinating idea, because I'd been running this nonprofit for almost 10 years. By that stage, we started the nonprofit in 2010, and I'd been looking for a way to have more of an impact, because after basically a decade of running the NPO, I came to the conclusion that I'm going to have a very, very small effect, negligible effect, and I'm going to spend all my life energy. And at the end of the day, the impact is going to be, smaller than minuscule. And I just looked at that and I was like, shit, I can't keep doing this. Like, if I'm gonna spend this much energy on this, it has to have a bigger impact. It just has to. Otherwise, I can't. And so I knew that Bitcoin could change the world in many very, very meaningful ways. Like you said, it doesn't fix everything, but man, it fixes a major, major, major problem, a huge problem. So I knew that Bitcoin could have a major impact on the world, and I just put two and two together when I heard about the Bitcoin Beach project, and very, very soon after that, I started playing with this idea of, okay, so how do I copy paste this model? And so we did that starting in late 2020, early 2021. We started looking at that, and we formally launched the project. We started implementing Bitcoin payments and Bitcoin salaries in the charity project in 2021 in August, and started posting about it in early 2022 in January. It caught a lot of attention very early on, which I was not entirely prepared for, but fortunately I had the experience of running the charity for many years before that, so I kind of I could stay grounded and not get caught up in the hype, which was very difficult on social media. It's very hard to not get sucked into that. And what we're basically doing is we've got a staff of, at the moment, it's 22 people. 10 of them work full time, 10 or 11, and the other 10, 11 work part time. We pay 100% of all salaries in Bitcoin. We do fundraising in Bitcoin. The charity has always been a donation-based charity, so it's still a donation-based charity, but we just do the fundraising in Bitcoin rather than fiat. If you look at the overall charity operations, I think only about 10 to 15% of all our operations take place in fiat. The other 85% of everything that we do is Bitcoin only. And we're building a circular economy to try and do a couple of things. I mean, first of all, we're trying to really change that community for the better, because ultimately you're teaching people how to spend Bitcoin so that they can become comfortable with the system, because you can't give them the Bitcoin standard and expect them to read that and become comfortable with this idea of saving in Bitcoin through the Bitcoin standard. So you get them to use it, to spend it. They learn to trust the system that way, and then they do start saving in it. And that's what it's really all about. Earn, spend, save in Bitcoin. The end goal is still saving. It's just that you get there through introducing it as a medium of exchange first. But ultimately, saving in Bitcoin is what's going to change the lives of people on the ground, because they've never really had access to any other form of savings, never had the incentive to save. If you're earning a couple of dollars a day, you can't open a stock portfolio, you can't start making investments, you can't buy property. So what do you invest in? But if you earn a couple of dollars a day, which is paid in Bitcoin, and you don't spend all of that, you are saving $1 or $2, and over time that accumulates. And with Bitcoin doing what it does, it doesn't just accumulate; it grows. And that's ultimately what what the aim is to introduce Bitcoin as everyday money for that reason. And we run a whole bunch of programs. So the staff that we employ do a bunch of different things. We've got surfing programs for kids. We've got financial literacy. We use the Bitcoin diploma from New Premier Bitcoin to do Bitcoin education. We do events. We've got, the two primary youth programs run 5 days a week. So it's basically like a school. The surfing program has 40 to 50 kids attending on a daily basis, sometimes 6 days a week. So it's a major operation. That's why there's 22 people that work for us. But it's the salaries of those 22 people that really power the circular economy. And yes, for the time being, it's reliant on outside donations in Bitcoin, but we're working on ways to make it sustainable and generate income, internally, because that's also something else that, that Bitcoin teaches you, is that, charity, I came to the conclusion that, charity is only good if you design it to be temporary. But if you're designing your charity to be permanent, then that's a problem.
Yeah, I really like that. I also got involved in charity work in Zimbabwe, and I came to the same conclusion. It's kind of like the saying, teach a man to fish,
Exactly.
rather than, yeah. So, yeah, that sounds.
Except the only thing about that saying is that you teach a man how to, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach him how to fish, feed him for a lifetime. That's the saying. And the only thing about that saying is that very, very few people understand, unless you've been involved in charity work, very few people understand how difficult it is to teach a man how to fish. The saying, teach a man how to fish, doesn't bring across just how difficult, because it sounds easy. Like, you teach someone how to fish. It's like, yeah, but that can take 1 or 2 generations.
Well, and in this case, you are teaching kids, I think, mostly Me Premier Bitcoin, which is
Yeah.
teaching them about money, giving them some basic tools that even I didn't know about. I thought I knew about money, but that was a whole new education. So that's a great start.
Yeah. I think it's a great start for kids, and, look, the surfing is also a great start because it's a very intense learning curve. Like, you really need to want to learn surfing. Surfing is not like other sporting activities where, not that I have anything against other sports, but, you can give a bunch of kids a ball and just let them play, and they will eventually learn how to play soccer, because they're kicking the ball around on the field, and they're having fun, and, they all know how to run. They all know how to kick a ball, more or less. And, but surfing is very different. Surfing has this incredibly steep learning curve, and it's nobody's natural environment. The ocean is a dangerous place. It can take people away in an instant. It's unpredictable. It's got a huge amount of power in it. So you're really learning to become a sort of a different person by learning to surf. It's I sort of compare it to, if you're going to learn to play the violin, you're not going to come out the other side the same person, because the thing that you've learned would have taken you through an immense process that involves a huge amount of proof of work, because nobody just picks up the violin and starts playing. It's the same with surfing. Nobody picks up a surfboard and just runs out there and gets it right. It just doesn't happen. It takes years. So surfing is also a great start, and it's kind of similar. There's some parallels to Bitcoin in that sense too, where it requires massive amounts of proof of work to get anywhere. And we start the surfing really young, like at age 6, 7. And then the Bitcoin education, we start that a little later, sort of between the ages of 12 to 14, because we need the kids to learn to read and write first before you can teach them about Bitcoin. And yeah, by the time these kids finish high school, the idea is that they would have read several Bitcoin books, and can kind of go from there, and hopefully also have earned some Bitcoin in the process, because we do we do pay kids. We reward them for good behavior in Bitcoin. So we built our own little bank based on the sort of BTC Pay server, Blink, and Bolt card protocol, where we give kids their own cards. All the kids in all our youth programs have their own card, and they'd get rewarded in Bitcoin for good performance in whichever field they're, sort of, whether it's surfing or the Bitcoin diploma program, or it's they get rewarded in Bitcoin. So yeah, we try and set them up with not only with the knowledge, but they would have had, by the time they finish school, they would have had the opportunity in one way or another to start saving a little bit as well, so that by the time they finish school and they start working, they already know what the concept of saving can do for them.
Yeah, I would imagine that's a big benefit. And obviously, you also educate on the importance of self custody. I know some of those wallets you mentioned are online for kids. Having it on a phone is important. But what do you tell people about the importance of self custody and being self sovereign?
I mean, I think it's a journey, and you put your foot in the door by starting with solutions that are probably not the ones that you'll end up with one day. Hopefully not. um, but when you're first introducing someone to Bitcoin, you're probably going to give them a custodial wallet, and that's totally fine. The cards that the kids have, that they can, they every Friday and every second Friday, I think they go around the township, and they tap the card to buy food. It's also interesting to have seen how the behavior of the kids in terms of what they purchase over time changes. They used to buy crap in the beginning, and they've started buying healthier stuff over time, which is interesting. Not all of them, obviously, but some of them. And I mean, but all of that, the entire system with the cards that we built is completely custodial. But that's fine. I mean, it's the idea is to introduce people, to introduce the kids, and then once we employ someone permanently, and they're now earning a real salary, without exception, they save using self custody wallets, hardware wallets. We've had generous donations from Blockstream with Jade hardware wallets, and from TREZOR, that have donated devices. Every single person that works for us full time, and all the business owners that accept Bitcoin as payment, and some family members of business owners, and other people in the community who have, over the last 3 to 4 years, found their way to Bitcoin because of the work that we do. If they save serious amounts of money, I mean, a serious amount of money can mean different things to different people, but if they're saving serious amounts of money in their context, yes, they are using self custody. But that being said, there are some people for who even that, it gets tricky. It's past a certain age. I mean, I've got nothing against older people, but past a certain age, especially if you're dealing with high levels of illiteracy, where people can't read numbers properly, it becomes a very scary prospect to introduce somebody to a self custodial solution that could go horribly wrong if they make the smallest mistake. And so there are people in which cases we would rather recommend that they custody it with a family member or something like that. It's self custody, but it's not in their custody, maybe a type of community custody, if you want to call it that. Fedi has been working on some very interesting things, and things are becoming very interesting now with the deployment of Fediment on Start9 and Umbrel, where you can actually start setting up community federations. So things like that, it's a journey, and it depends on the situation. I don't think there's no point shoving a seed signer down everybody's throat. Like, ultimately, that's what I want to use because that's the best. That's the best that there is. But I think you're making a mistake if you assume that every single person is going to end up there. A better assumption to make is to say, look, I would like every person to work towards that, but not everybody will get there, and that's fine.
Yeah, that's a really good point. my 80-year-old mom is not interested in using Bitcoin and probably never will be, but she sees the benefits having grown up in Zimbabwe.
For
I was
sure.
thinking about, um, I was thinking about, how do you convince people there that accepting Bitcoin is better than accepting the local currency? Is it because over time it goes up? Because now, as we know, it's volatile and it goes up and down too. So,
Hmm.
how do you approach that?
I mean, look, my personal focus has always been on working with the coaches and the staff, and it's the staff who go out into the community and onboard people. So I don't have a huge amount of direct contact with businesses in the community, and it's kind of on purpose. Like the South African context, you got to understand that the reality on the ground is that a white person can't just walk into a township that's predominantly black and start doing things. Like that's just the reality, and there's no point shying away from that. So I try to keep it not I don't try to keep myself distant. I'd rather put it in a way where I try to create leaders out of the people that work for the organization, so that they're the ones leading the effort in the township community, and they are the ones that then work with the businesses. But as far as I can tell, and I mean, I know this because I spend so much time with the staff. Obviously, it's an ongoing thing running, managing 22 people, most of whom have very little educational background, and you're trying to build an organization out of that. That's you spend a lot of time with the people. So I know exactly what's going on, but I think the biggest draw towards Bitcoin is the ease of moving money around more than the long-term store of value initially. So initially, the fact that I can open a wallet on my phone, and then and when I say I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about somebody in the community. The fact that somebody in the community can open a wallet on their phone and then somebody else can put money in there, and then they can very, very quickly, very easily put another wallet on another phone and then move all of that money from the one phone to the other one. And they don't have to go and open a new account or stand in a queue or submit papers that they don't have, or go queue
Or
at
the
the
high
local,
fees.
or
Yeah, high
the high
fees.
fees. That's
Yeah.
another big one. The fact that they can leave, and this is another big one, the fact that they can leave the money in that wallet and there's no fees coming off unless they use the wallet. So there's no subscription fees. There's none of that. There's no hidden fees. That's a big one. Another big one is the fact that the Bitcoin is this push system. It's not a pull system. So well, I mean, there are exceptions, but typically your average, sort of Lightning wallet, you can't give someone authorization to pull Bitcoin out of your wallet. You have to physically make the payment. If you don't do that, then the money doesn't move. Banking is a pull system, and because of that, there's predatory loan agreements where people would go out and buy things that they can't afford, and then the shops give them these lay-by agreements where they sell this thing to them, where they walk out of the store without paying anything, but they sign a contract where they then pay back over a period of time, but they don't understand the fine print. That's the problem. They don't understand what they're signing. And then a year later or 2 years later, this thing should have been paid as far as they understand it. But then because of interest or fine print terms and conditions, there's still money coming off of their bank account. And at that point, they stop using the bank account and they just leave it empty, because then they can't lose any money. And so that doesn't happen with Bitcoin wallets. I think it gives you more security, even though the wallets they're using in most instances are custodial. It gives them a sense that the money is theirs, because there's no invisible hand going into their bank account and taking money out of it, and they don't understand what that money is for. Like you're paying fees for this and fees for that and fees for that and fees for that. And then there's this debit order that they, but Bitcoin wallets don't work like that. If you put money in there, 2 months later, it's still exactly the same amount in terms of sats, at least, obviously not the fiat value. I think that's a big draw
Yeah.
card. So it's the ease of moving money and the control over that movement and storage of money that is appealing. And then obviously over the long term, the idea of saving and accumulating wealth becomes very attractive. But that's not the initial attraction.
Yeah, I'm sure that comes with education. Bitcoin is better money. It's a better system. It's an upgrade. I know that my mom had a bank account in South Africa, and she is actually South African. And we came back the next year, it was all gone to fees.
Mm,
That doesn't always happen in the US because you keep a certain balance and you don't get the fees. But I know
mm.
it does happen in South Africa and many countries in Africa.
Yeah, I mean we've got very very high fees relatively speaking. I mean, I don't know about other countries, but I know about South Africa. South Africa has to comply to all these international regulations set by organizations like what's that FATF, FATF, and whatever, and these sort of supranational organizations that don't fall under any government but dictate terms and conditions to all governments. And so we've got to meet the same regulations as countries like Germany or the UK or the US, but the average person earns way less. And so compliance costs relative to what people earn, compliance costs are very, very high in South Africa. Well, obviously, it's one of the reasons why there's more unbanked people, because it's just not profitable for the banks, considering the high compliance cost. It's just not profitable for them to go after a certain type of person, to bank that person, because they're never going to make money off of them. Although that's changed a bit, there's been some interesting, banking solutions that have catered to that market. But overall, that is a very typical concern. People are afraid that all their money is going to disappear out of their bank account because of fees.
So you mentioned that you started using Bitcoin in 2015. Is that correct? How did that happen?
I mean, I bought a little bit of Bitcoin right at the top in 2013, and then I watched the price crash. That was a painful experience, and so I was kind of forced to learn about it and started reading about it and understand what it is. I mean, I say forced, but my wife had she played a large role in that, because she was a little upset by the fact that we had very little money at that stage. We had just started our tourism business, and so I spent about a month worth of groceries on buying some Bitcoin for cash from a guy down the road. So by 2015, I had a pretty good understanding of what it was. And then, we had clients we had Ukrainian clients who banked in Russia, who wanted to come on one of our tourist trips. And because of the sanctions after the first war in Crimea, well, what's actually the beginning of the current war that's still ongoing. It's not really two different conflicts. It's a long, stretched out conflict that just escalated in 2022. But in 2014, those sanctions were initially imposed. And so we had people who wanted to pay us, who wanted to come on holiday to South Africa and couldn't. They were cut off from their bank accounts. And we went through a whole list of options of how could they pay us. And eventually I was like, guys, look, you probably don't know what Bitcoin is, but there's this thing called Bitcoin. I'm going to send you some information. I'm pretty sure that you can find somewhere in Ukraine to buy some of the stuff. If you can, I'll be happy to accept payment in that. I sent them some information, and they came back a week later and they were like, "Yeah, no, this looks awesome. I'll send you the money in Bitcoin." And I don't know where they bought it. I don't know where they got it, but all I know was that they paid for their trip. That was the first time we accepted Bitcoin as payment in our business. And I wish I'd kept all of that, obviously. The price of Bitcoin at that time was $180. I don't have that Bitcoin anymore. We had a business to run. So obviously, we were using it as a way to transfer value from one place to another. But then once the Bitcoin got here, we had to, convert a lot of it to fiat to run the business. This network that I used to receive payment, which I'd learned a little bit about by then. I mean, by then I kind of knew the basics, and it was just mind boggling to see that transaction came through. At no point during the entire process did we not know where the money was. They initiated the payment on their side. My wallet could instantly see it on this side. I could look on a blockchain explorer and see when the transaction was likely going to be confirmed. It took less than 10 minutes for the transaction to confirm, and that was it. And as soon as that happened, I was like, I mean, the experience of buying a bit of Bitcoin in 2013 wasn't the same, because the person that I bought it from was sitting right next to me. And okay, the transfer still happened in the same way. It's still obviously broadcast on chain, et cetera, et cetera. But it just wasn't the same experience because the person was physically next to me. This time in 2015, it was from somewhere on the other side of the world that we literally tried everything. We even, at one point, they suggested that they pay us in gambling credits because this guy worked for an online gambling website. And I was like, no, that's, uh, um, so it was just mind boggling, to experience that.
Right there is just such a great example of why we need Bitcoin because of all these governments putting conditions on when I think people just don't really realize that we could have a peer to peer money exchange and we don't have to follow everything the governments say. I never knew that. So that's a great example.
Yeah, no, likewise. It was a fascinating experience to know that I could do something, whether or not the authorities liked it was irrelevant. Um, I think all Bitcoiners are sort of naturally rebellious a little bit, but in that particular case, it was very clearly unfair. Like there was no reason for these people to be stuck behind sanctions. Like what the fuck? They hadn't done anything wrong. In fact, they were not. The sanctions were imposed against Russia because Russia was the aggressor in that situation, but they weren't even Russian. They were Ukrainian. They banked in Russia because obviously the Ukraine is. I mean, Russia is corrupt, but Ukraine is corrupt on another level. And so they, as Ukrainians, they trusted the Russian banking system more than they trusted the Ukrainian system. And they could bank in Russia, and so they did. So they were Ukrainians banking in Russia, and these sanctions cut them off from their money, and that was totally unfair. And so I just looked at that and I was like, it's not even that I want to stick it to the man. It's just that more often than not, the rules that the man imposes is completely unfair, and it affects people in ways that are just like doesn't make any sense. Like they're targeting a tiny little small group of criminals and affecting a huge swathe of the population that hasn't done anything wrong. So I really do think that that experience shaped my understanding of Bitcoin in meaningful ways, because I still feel that in order to really understand Bitcoin, you gotta use it in a context that is not just saving and seeing the appreciation of value. That's very, very important. And that is the most important underlying value proposition of Bitcoin, I think. But I think to really understand it, you've got to use it in other contexts where you're being cut off from your money, or where you can't afford a bank account, or because you can't open a bank account because you haven't got the papers to do so, etc., etc.
Yeah. Well, Herman, this has been fascinating. I could ask you so many more questions, but we're over the hour, and I would love you to tell us where people can find you.
I mean, our primary channels are X and Noster. So we've got profiles on both of those. We do also have a Facebook and Instagram profile, but I hardly ever look at that. So yeah, if you search Bitcoin Ekasi on X, you should find us, and also on Noster. I mean, Noster is a little bit more difficult to find people, but if you're using the Primal app, then it's pretty straightforward. Primal has a fantastic search function. You can find almost anyone just by searching for their name. So yeah, those two. And then I mean, if you want to get in touch with us, I suggest not doing it via DM on X, but rather go to our website. There's an email contact form. If you send an email through the website, you'll get in touch with one of us for sure.
And I'll post links below. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for joining me today.
Thank you very much. It was a fascinating conversation. Really appreciate it.